Hello Squad, welcome to my Newcomer's Guide to Middle-earth, where I explain as clearly and concisely as I can all the highly pertinent information I wish someone would have told me years ago. The first time you read The Lord of the Rings, or even The Hobbit, can be a bewildering experience. Tolkien constructed an absurdly detailed setting, so densely packed with information that you're almost inevitably going to miss a few things the first time through, or not realize their significance until later. There's also references that Tolkien deliberately leaves opaque. But somewhere along the line, after you've finally sorted out all the references to Aragorn's family tree, and accepted that even Elrond can't explain Tom Bombadil, you're going to be left with questions that seem like they should have answers. Things that the characters almost seem to take for granted, but are never really explained to the reader. Questions like, who or what is it that blessed the Blessed Realm? Who is Elbereth, and why are the elves so keen on her? Where did Sauron come from? Why don't our intrepid heroes ever encounter temples, shrines, priests, or clerics? The answer to most of these questions lies in understanding the oldest and strangest beings in Arda, the Ainur. The Ainur are spirits that existed before the beginning of time, and assisted in the creation of Middle-earth. Many, though far from all of them, entered the world at the beginning of time to continue shaping it. They are often explained as being analogous to gods or angelic figures, and while this is a bit of an oversimplification, it's not a bad place to begin. The name Ainur is an Elvish term meaning holy ones. Ainur are apparently immortal, at least within the context of Arda. They are not tied to their bodies, they don't require things like food or sleep to sustain themselves. As a rule, they don't procreate, and destroying their bodies doesn't kill them, it merely sets them back. In fact, the Ainur naturally exist in an unclad, purely spiritual form, and assume physical form at will. Mostly they appear humanoid, but they've been recorded taking forms as diverse as wolves, serpents, or even trees. The Ainur participated in the creation of Middle-earth in a process Tolkien mythologically describes in the Ainulindale, or the Music of the Ainur. Because of this, the Ainur have tremendous insight into the nature and intended function of everything in Middle-earth, and are by far the most skilled in what we would call magical or spiritual power. But there are limitations on what they are able or permitted to do. While they all contributed concepts and features to the making of the world, they are not able to bring those creative ideas into independent existence. That is a power reserved to the single omnipotent creator known to the elves as Eru Ilúvatar, or the One Father of All. This point is fundamental in understanding the relationship between the Ainur and Middle-earth's other inhabitants. This isn't the Ainur's world, they're just living in it. They have a degree of power and authority over forces of nature like water or light, but not power over creation itself, or over elves or men, the so-called children of Ilúvatar, who are Eru's direct additions to Arda. The Ainur lack the degree of insight into these beings that they have into the rest of the world, and moreover, they aren't supposed to interfere with them too much, which includes attempting to manipulate or impress them by flaunting their very real might. Now, just because the Ainur can't create independent life doesn't mean they don't try, and just because they're not allowed to unduly influence elves and men doesn't mean it never happens. We'll get into those cases later. Nevertheless, this basic stricture explains why we don't often witness the direct involvement of the Ainur in history, especially by the Third Age of Middle-earth when the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings take place. The Ainur that entered the world at the beginning of time to take part in its history can be divided into two classes. The 14 most powerful are known by the elves as the Valar, and there's also an indeterminate but presumably large number of lesser spirits who assist them, known as the Maiar. For the sake of completeness, I'll list the names of all the Valar and their descriptions, as presented in the Silmarillion. I feel like this would best be done in something like a Pokerap, but since I'm not talented in that sphere, I will spare you guys that agony and just briefly summarize. Manwe is the chief of the Valar, sometimes called the Elder King, the being with the most authority and power within Arda. He's associated with the sky and wind. His spouse is Varda, the Lady of the Stars, known in Sindarin as Elbereth, and particularly revered by the elves. Ulmo is the Vala of water, especially the sea, and he's known for sending prophetic dreams and generally making himself useful to Middle-earth's inhabitants. Aule is the Vala of craft and technology, and is concerned with rock and soil. His wife Yavanna is the queen of the earth and concerned with the natural world of plants and animals. Nienna is the Valier of pity, compassion, and mourning, and tends to be found among the souls of the dead. Namo, better known as Mandos, though that is actually the name of his dwelling, is the Doomsman, the prophetic figure of the Valar and the judge of dead souls. His wife Vaire is a weaver who records the history of the world in the tapestries she hangs in the halls of the dead. Namo's brother is Irmo, also called Lorien, who is associated with sleep, dreams, and visions. Este, the Valier of Healing, is married to him. Yavanna's younger sister Vana is the Valier of Youth, Spring, Flowers, and Beauty. She is married to Orome, the huntsman of the Valar, who enjoys riding his big horse and blowing his big horn. Orome's sister is Nessa, known for her speed and her dancing, and for her association with marriage. She weds Tulkas, the last of the Valar to enter Middle-earth, who delights in feats of physical strength and in fighting. Despite being a pretty jovial guy, it's Tulkas who is the Valar's most direct weapon against the forces of evil. There are relatively few named Maiar. One of the most famous is Melian, notable for marrying an elf and becoming the mother of the famous Luthien Tenuviel. Eonwe is the herald of Manwë. Osse and his spouse Uinen are in Ulmo's service and help control the sea and storms. But the best-known Maiar aren't really known for being Maiar at all. The 5 wizards, or Istari, including Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast, were Maiar sent to Middle-earth in a roughly human guise to assist the good-hearted people of Middle-earth in their efforts against Sauron, himself a Maia, but one who long ago turned to the service of evil. There's also a host of mysterious creatures who may or may not be Maiar or similar creatures. Tolkien suggested at one point that the great eagles associated with Manwë might have been Maiar that took the guise of animals. Like Sauron, Balrogs are Maiar loyal to Morgoth who assumed demonic form. Similar origins have been suggested for dragons, vampires, and wargs. And one theory Tolkien toyed with was that evil Maiar may have been involved in the breeding of the first orcs. Tom Bombadil, who claims to be older than the oldest elf, and the monstrous Shelob and her mother Ungoliant are also potential Ainur-adjacent beings. If your head is spinning at this point, don't worry, it's not necessary to memorize all these characters to understand their collective role or enjoy the Legendarium. In addition to the 14 Valar who descended into the world with the intent of shaping and developing it, there's another, Melkor, more widely known as Morgoth, who desires to dominate all of existence and refuses to cooperate with the others. Although originally counted among the Valar, he is cast out due to his malice and treachery. Morgoth and the rest of the Valar contend with each other in primal conflict for millennia, until in disgust the Valar retreat to a fortified realm known as Valinor, the Blessed Realm or Undying Lands. When the elves, the first incarnate people, awaken in Middle-earth, they become another point of conflict between Morgoth, who would like to compel their worship and obedience, and the other Valar who see it as their duty to try to protect the elves, and encourage them to join the Valar in their purified and sheltered land. Neither side really counts on the elves deciding to take things into their own hands and oppose Morgoth themselves. Although this is a deeply unwise idea, the Valar can't lawfully do much to interfere with what Eru's own children have decided to do. During the resulting struggles, in which men also get swept up the second they appear, the Valar take an increasingly passive role, relegated to protecting Valinor, offering what limited refuge and healing they're able to give, and providing the occasional flash of insight or prophetic hint to those willing to open their minds to them. Elves and their allies occasionally call out to invite this aid. In The Lord of the Rings, they typically entreat Varda, using her title Elbereth, since as the Lady of Light and Stars, she is particularly useful against gloom and darkness. And moreover, as the spouse of Manwë, she can hear everything that transpires in Middle-earth borne on the wind. I mentioned that the Valar are often described as the gods of Middle-earth, and they do share a lot of traits with other mythological pantheons. Each is associated with a specific element, role, or force of nature. They are organized in a hierarchy under a supreme king, and they have interrelationships within that hierarchy. They dwell beyond the boundaries of what we'd consider the normal world in a protected and unspeakably beautiful realm to which the very deserving may be given permission to travel. They are called by different epithets and titles. Even the distinction between the powerful Valar and the less powerful Maiar recalls the idea of gods and demigods. Actually, in the earliest versions of the Legendarium, the Maiaran characters tend to be the offspring of the various Valar. And Tolkien even states that as a narrative device, the Valar are meant to provide beings of the same order of beauty, power, and majesty as the gods of higher mythology, which can yet be accepted, well, shall we say baldly, by a mind that believes in the Blessed Trinity. But there's also a crucial difference. Though powerful and holy, the Valar aren't really considered deities, at least not by elves and their human allies. They have the authority to shape the world, but they aren't responsible for its existence. They are subject to the same basic moral laws as elves and men are, and they hold the incarnates equal to them in dignity, if not in power, since, after all, they all proceed from the same source, Eru, the sole creator. There are a couple apparent exceptions to this, but they all actually further prove the rule. Aule, the Vala of Craft, secretly attempts to create a people of his own and comes up with dwarves. But though he's able to construct their bodies, and even, apparently, a rudimentary kind of mind, Aule's dwarves lack consciousness and wills of their own, until Aule, realizing his mistake, repents and offers his work to Eru in an attempt to make amends. Eru accepts this offering by imbuing the dwarves with the true life Aule was unable to give them. So, though dwarves originated with Aule, they too are considered children of Eru, albeit adopted ones. Aule's spouse Yavanna fears that the dwarves her husband created will not be terribly sensitive to the ecological balance that is her main concern. Unlike Aule, she appeals directly to Eru for help, and he obliges by using elements of Yavanna's part in the song to bring forth the Ents. So in both cases, while the ideas for Ents and dwarves originated in the minds of individual Valar, their existence as independent entities is ascribed to Eru. An Ent may look upon Yavanna as the origin or founder of his race, and would certainly hold her in deep respect, but the Ent would not feel Yavanna was the creator to whom he owed his very being. And Yavanna would not accept such devotion. Worship of the Valar is discouraged by the Valar themselves, and thus there are very few references to rituals, religious orders, or cult practices in Middle-earth, despite Tolkien's willingness to invent and describe in extreme detail most other aspects of life in Middle-earth. The closest thing we see in The Lord of the Rings, apart from the appeals to Varda, is the Gondorian practice of silently facing west before dining. There's another good in-universe reason why few practices of veneration exist around the Valar, and that's because Morgoth, unlike his more self-aware and law-abiding brethren, had no trouble at all demanding worship from elves and men, going so far as to make his own attempt at creating a people whose sole purpose would be executing his will. How exactly he went about this, and to what extent he succeeded, remains a confused point, but the result was the repellent twisted orcs. He also seduced a number of men into revering him as a god, and his lieutenant Sauron eventually convinced the people of Numenor to do the same. Therefore, in Middle-earth, devotional practices are overwhelmingly associated with the deceptions and corruptions of Morgoth and his servants, as well as with the inevitable barbarity and catastrophe that follows. So elves and good-hearted men are understandably extremely cautious about creating shrines or enacting formal rites. Another way the Ainur are referred to is as angels or angelic powers. Even Tolkien often used this term, though he frequently added qualifications or scare quotes when doing so. Again, it's easy to point out similarities. They are creatures of pure spirit who serve a single all-powerful creator, their existence predates the world, and they are known for singing in a massive, timeless choir. They often have to veil their splendor when taking physical form if they don't want to terrify the more earthly individuals they interact with, and lest we forget, the mightiest and most radiant among them rebels against divine authority and becomes a hideous subterranean force of corruption and revenge, dragging a significant number of lesser spirits down with him. Particularly Gandalf and the other wizards are often described as angels, but in at least one place Tolkien is very specific about what he meant in using that term, which as a classically trained linguist he knew derived from the Greek term meaning messenger. There are naturally no precise modern terms to say what he was, he writes. I would venture to say that he was an incarnate angel, strictly an angelos, that is, with the other istari, an emissary. Thus the istari's assignment was to provide help in the form of messages, insights, counsels, and warnings. They were not meant to take action themselves or oppose Sauron directly. But in general, the Valar and Maiar are not mere messengers. They do have the authority and capacity to wield power over nature, oppose Morgoth, develop their own creative ideas, and pursue their own interests and agendas. Their ability to directly communicate with the deity they serve is imperfect, so they're often left to figure out for themselves the best course of action. And their track record is far from spotless. They dwell permanently in the world. While the Blessed Realm may be heavenly, it is not actually heaven. Compared to the remote and beatific image generally conjured by the word angel, the Valar and Maiar have more skin in the game. They are more directly involved in history and more limited and fallible than if they functioned purely as neutral conduits for the direct intervention of divine will. So instead of trying to approach the Ainur as if they were simply Tolkien's version of gods or angels, I find the best approach is to think of them as just another of Middle-earth's different peoples. A people that may be vastly more powerful or intelligent than we are, and also particularly alien, but still basically dealing with the same questions elves, dwarves, and hobbits grapple with. how to best preserve and enrich the world that they're responsible for, and how best to orient themselves toward the others who share this responsibility. I find that taking this view is the best one for making sense of the many ways that their influence can be felt, if not always immediately recognized in Lord of the Rings. If you found this video helpful, reveal its true might to the algorithm by hitting the like button. For more insights, counsels, and warnings in the form of videos from this channel, you could try opening your mind directly to the influence of the spirits, or you could just hit subscribe. Thank you to everyone for watching, and double thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon, including Jared Carver, Rogue Hot Pocket, Joel Bion, Kevin Gilstad, Karen and Michael Donahue, Luke, Tamara Saldana, Louis Maskell, Frankie 12-String, Eliana Nor, A.N. Kreutzberg, Elu Thickgoal, E. Rose B., Brendan Mooney, John Love, Emperor Kane, and Dorwin Gray. To join their ranks and see some of the other things I've been working on, you can check out the link to my Patreon page in the description.